Welcome to the New Mexico Suncast, and thank you for joining us. Today we have Larry and Carla Sonntag with the New Mexico Business Coalition. Carla is the CEO and president of the coalition and Better Together New Mexico. Larry Sonntag, former police officer, her husband. He's here because he is the chief of staff of both organizations and has a lot to say about the way our law enforcement has been hampered. Would that be a fair assessment, Larry? Hampered in doing their job over the past several years?
Hampered is a nice way of putting it, yes.
Well, we're going to get into it quite deeply because crime in New Mexico is really causing a lot of problems for just basic citizens. And you are both involved in attracting business and supporting business interests. I want to emphasize that both of your organizations are nonpartisan in their approach. So we're not talking about a Republican-Democrat deal. Joaquin Romero is our producer, and he is the community liaison for the New Mexico Suncast and the NewMexicoSun.com. So whatever you hear on this interview is also going to be, stories will be published in the NewMexicoSun.com. So the upcoming mayoral election and crime in Albuquerque is really our focus today. So let's get started. I want to ask you both, do you have members of the New Mexico Business Coalition who have been affected by property and violent crime? Have their businesses been negatively affected? Carla, why don't you go first?
We have many of them. In fact, we've lost several members who have left the state because of it. So it's an ongoing problem. And regardless of what the mayor says now that things are getting better, it's not getting better.
Well, and that is a really interesting thing because, as you know, we just recently did a nice interview with Tom Grover. He's now an attorney, former police sergeant with APD. And Larry, you worked with these gentlemen, didn't you?
Yes.
Mike Geyer, former chief of police, and Brian McCutcheon, also a former sergeant. And we wanted to have Brian on, too, because he was basically given the responsibility of protecting citizens during the balloon fiesta as part of his job. And of course, that's coming up this next weekend. So the interview is actually going to provide some of the basis for these questions. I am confused, Carla and Larry, how the incumbent mayor, Tim Keller, he has postulated many so-called crime initiatives, and I'll list those for you a little bit later. But crime is worse than it was in 2017. We've heard many reasons why it's hard to recruit police officers. I'm going to start with this. Former police chief Mike Geyer said we need as many as 1,600 or 1,700 police officers in order to effectively cover the city of Albuquerque. Right now, according to the CABQ website, we have less than 900 police officers. Larry, let's talk about what's keeping the police department from recruiting.
Well, certainly there's a morale problem. And starting from the top, from the mayor and the chief of police, officers do not feel like they have the support that is required to go out and do this type of a job. And, you know, there's been a lot of talk in the last 7, 8, 9 years for what's causing that. We had the consent decree that caused a lot of issues. And that's gone away, fortunately. But the numbers that Chief Geyer was talking about, he's absolutely correct. I retired 16, 17 years ago, but I was in a position about 20, 25 years ago when it was my job to let the chief of police know exactly how many officers Albuquerque Police Department had and where every single one of those officers were. At that time, we had just under 900 police officers. That was 30 years ago. And
yeah, that's shocking. And obviously, the population of Albuquerque Metro has increased pretty substantially in the last 25 years, and we actually have less people on the street protecting us. Carla, you mentioned in our first question that you know of businesses that have packed up and left the state of New Mexico. Could you share a couple stories about people that you've talked to and why they're leaving?
It's interesting. Some of it is a business decision because they are not getting the support that they need. The police officers are told by the mayor and the chief of police not to respond to certain calls. And so if they continue to call for support, they can be labeled as a nuisance property and they can be prosecuted. So it's a catch 22. They can't win. And some of them are spending so much on cleaning up debris and all the stuff that is left by people who choose to camp there at their properties, and they're breaking windows and starting fires, and they can't afford it anymore because a lot of the damage falls underneath their deductible. But even if it doesn't, and they continue to make claims, then the insurance company gets frustrated and doesn't want to cover them anymore. So they're getting caught from every side. They can't get support from law enforcement. They're having trouble with their insurance. Costs are skyrocketing. It's a lot easier to go someplace else where there is good protection, good support for business, where they can make a living and provide good paying jobs. And so they're leaving. The other side of that is the family side, where the spouse or them, the couple together says, we can't be here anymore because our children aren't safe and they're not getting a good education. And so that's maybe the human side of it. And then you've got the business side of it. People are just getting squeezed from every angle.
One of the points that former officer Brian McCutcheon made in our interview is that the police officers are no longer, they are instructed not to arrest for what I guess would be called a lower level crime like shoplifting. And the point that he was making is that real law enforcement starts with the small things. So if we're letting shoplifters go and not prosecuting them, and um, there's no real consequences. I want to ask Larry, as a police officer, if somebody when you were serving would have said, Larry, we want you to just protect us from the big things like murder and maybe car theft or large property crimes, whatever it might be, but just don't worry about the shoplifters and stuff. What would you have thought as a police officer at that time?
Well, it would just be ridiculous, and the theories have been proven over and over. And when I was serving, they talked about it. You've heard it before. It's called the broken window theory. If you don't fix broken windows on a house or a commercial building, then next thing you know, everything falls into disrepair. And when you're talking about crimes, if you don't address traffic, if you don't address the other shoplifting and other crime, the smaller crimes, then that tells the criminal element and others that there's no accountability. So it does have an impact on larger crimes whenever you're told and your police officers are told to don't make arrests. And discretion has always been a major part of a police officer's duty, and they make the decision. You don't arrest, there's no way you can arrest every time you see an infraction, but they need to have the discretion to make arrests, especially if they are running into the same people that are committing these smaller crimes. They need to go to jail. They need to understand that there are accountability measures for them committing smaller crimes.
And how much frustration does a police officer experience when they do make an arrest for something they feel is fairly serious, maybe extreme vandalism, and an hour after they make the arrest and book the individual, they're released? How frustrating is that?
It's very frustrating, and judicial reform is a part of this picture. We do need to address the catch and release situation, but even whenever I was making arrests years ago, that was not the primary concern. Officers know that all we can do is to try to protect the public and take action when we know that a law has been violated. And so, what the courts do, yes, it's frustrating, but with the right motivation and morale, officers are still going to make the arrests and then let bureaucrats and legislators and people upline deal with the back end of let's fix the courts.
Yeah. Carla, just for information for our viewers, when did you and Larry get together? Was he a police officer when you met him?
No.
So
He
that
was
was
not.
pre-law enforcement, huh?
Yeah, well, in fact, we were in Germany because he was in the military,
Huh.
and we were separating and coming back, and he started looking at being a police officer, and I said, "Oh, come on, there's got to be something else you can do." But it was really a passion of his, and so that's what he did for 20 years, and took a lot of pride in his work in serving the people of Albuquerque and trying to keep them safe.
Well, thank the Lord that you made it through that and had a positive impact on the community. But Carla, if you guys were newlyweds today and he was going into law enforcement in Albuquerque, how would you feel about it as his wife?
I would not be supportive. It just would not be an option because the police officers don't get the support that they need. They're out there risking their lives every day, and they don't have the chief and the mayor standing behind them, and it's inexcusable. There is no motivation in my mind for someone to risk their life if they don't have someone to support them in the back end, and it's just not right. And so that is where I would have put my foot down and said no, absolutely not. We If he needed to do police work, we'd go to a different jurisdiction than Albuquerque.
Yeah. I've asked you in the past, both of you, why you stayed in Albuquerque. And I have the same reason for staying that I think you have. I love this place. I love New Mexico. I can drive 2 hours and be in some of the best trout fishing in the country. I can hike a mountain in various places. I mean, there's just beauty that is second to none and second to no other state. Now, there are states that have beautiful mountains, but those states are a little too chilly for this one. I like that four-season thing. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but why are you fighting through the New Mexico Business Coalition and Better Together New Mexico? Tell us a little bit about what you do and how you try to work with businesses.
Well, we started the organization 16 years ago because we're native New Mexicans, and like you, Jim, we love the state. We wanted to see it do better. I believe we've got the most amazing resources here, both in people and natural resources. We should be one of the wealthiest states in the nation with a thriving economy, happy people, great educational system, and safety. And we can achieve that. And that is our goal. And that's why we do this. We work on better business policy that will get us to that place because New Mexico and its citizens deserve better.
And so, if a small business owner is watching this today, how would they get involved with the New Mexico Business Coalition and how would it benefit them to be part of your organization?
Well, we would love to have them on our team. We said from day one we would never take government money. I don't think it's right for, in my personal opinion, for us to take taxpayer money when they don't know where it's going and they have no say about that. But a business owner who wants to support good business policy and people who fight every day, day in and day out, for better benefits for everyone, then they should join us. And they can go to our website at nmbizcoalition.org, and biz is BIZ, or call us at 505-836-4223. We'd love to get them on our team. We are working for them, whether they're a member or not, but we would greatly appreciate their support so we can continue this work.
Well, and I know in past you do a lot for the legislature. You're really kind of gearing up, though, for this mayoral election is the first week in November. And let's talk now about, I guess I should back up and say, crime is not the only thing that is deterring people from coming to New Mexico and doing business. You already mentioned education. New Mexico has been last in terms of education. And the funny thing is, it's not complicated. There's two measures. That is fourth grade reading level and eighth grade math scores are the two primary indicators. And New Mexico is literally dead last. But when it comes to crime statistics, we're at the bottom of the 50 states in violent crimes committed per capita and in property crimes committed per capita. The officers that I recently interviewed, I asked them if we actually have less car theft in Albuquerque proper than we did previously, because that's what the politicians are reporting, that has gone down. What's really happened is they have creative accounting so that they don't necessarily classify cars stolen from Albuquerque. And they said absolutely car theft has not decreased. And in fact, may even be on the increase. So who is accountable for this? And that's going to lead us right into talking about these mayoral candidates. A lot of people I've read say that they have a plan, but that's all they say. They don't really outline it. Have you seen any of the candidates with what you would call a legitimate plan?
Actually, I have. One of the one of the candidates is he's serving on the city council right now, Luis Sanchez, and he was 26 years with the Albuquerque Police Department. So now he's had the experience of being on the law enforcement side, and then now serving on the city council. He's articulated some specific plans that you get from the knowledge that he has. And one of those is getting more uniformed officers on the streets. And yes, we do need to recruit and expand the number of officers up to the 1,200, 1,500. But right now, if we have 850, depending on which day it is and who you ask, you hear that there might be 250 uniformed officers taking calls for service. That's outrageous. So Luis Sanchez has said, we will take some of the non-uniformed officers and do something that this has been done before in years past when we needed more uniformed officers. 1 day or 2 days a week, you get out from behind the desk and put your uniform on and go out and take calls for service. You immediately expand the visibility of the workforce that you have while you're trying to grow out the numbers.
This is kind of a sideline, but I've heard a lot of complaining. I haven't actually heard any of the mayoral candidates complaining about this, but you might have seen the advertisements for ICE. And part of those advertisements is to say, look, when you became a police officer, you were sworn to protect the people, but now you're being hindered by things like sanctuary city policies and various things. And they're signing bonuses, I think 50,000, which is kind of paid over the first 5 years. I mean, there's just a lot of incentives. I would categorize the people complaining in that as whining, because Larry, isn't there a way to make serving in APD just as attractive as serving in ICE? It's just kind of like the vision has been lost. The leadership is not leading. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And there's always been competition with the federal agencies going back to when I was there, the Secret Service and FBI, they're always recruiting local law enforcement officers. But you're absolutely right. The homegrown protection, this is our community. And Albuquerque police, we had a lot of pride when I was serving. The academy was one of the best, it was the best in the state, it was the best in the nation. Our crime lab did things that no other crime lab had done before. There was definitely a level of pride and a reason for people to stay with the department. And you're right, a lot of that has been lost.
One of the big topics that I've asked many police officers, including the interview I did with Chief Geyer and Brian McCutcheon and Tom Grover, is I ask them if the excuse of the CASA oversight That was the DOJ oversight of APD that happened prior to 2017 when Mike Geyer came in as chief. I've heard that that has been used as an excuse. That oversight just ended in May of 2024. So the incumbent administration has basically said, yeah, we didn't know it would happen, but it's prevented us from recruiting. Well, that's been over a year since it was done. And then the second thing is obviously we know COVID-19 happened in 2020. That's also been used as an excuse. So I asked them, do you think those two things in history are legitimate excuses for us not having more than 900 officers and actually increasing the number of sworn officers? They answered an emphatic no. Those are not legitimate excuses. What do we need to do to change the tide?
Well, again, we have done this before. Back when Marty Chavez was mayor, we went from 800 and some officers up to, I think, right at 1,200 officers because there was a major recruiting push. I worked in the recruiting and selection unit at some point, and it's like any other business. Whenever you really need to fill out your ranks, whether it's Sandia Labs or Albuquerque Police Department, you get a marketing plan, you put incentives in place. The police department can do bonuses. You can award people who have college education. There's all kinds of things you can do to incentivize. And Jim, I got to tell you, the pay has gone up considerably since I left. And so, it can't be said anymore that you can't make a living or a decent living as a police officer because their pay has increased significantly over the last 10 years.
Carlo, I asked you earlier if you would support Larry becoming a police officer now, if he was just beginning his career and you were married. Just pretend that you had been recently married. You've been married for a long time. By the way, I have so much admiration for people that are married and love each other. You guys, it's interesting that you work together. Uh, I think that's just really cool, and I really appreciate that. I know, Carla, you did a lot to support Larry early in your relationship. He does a lot to support you now. And so, God bless all the stuff that you guys are doing because it doesn't come without some pushback. Who's pushing back, Carla? When you come out and say, hey, the incumbent mayor and our current chief of police need to take responsibility for the crime in Albuquerque. Who's pushing back at that? How can anybody refute that statement?
Well, the current mayor has his whole gang of support, and they will be the ones that push back. They want to see him get reelected for a third term when the average person in Albuquerque is saying, we're looking at failure for 8 years. We're looking at a city that was at one time much safer than it is right now. It has gone downhill, and we don't want 4 more years of that. But the pushback comes from those who support the current mayor and the chief of police. They support the status quo, which is completely unacceptable to the majority of people in Albuquerque who don't feel safe. And so, but we don't care if there's always going to be difference of opinions. We're going to be respectful. And when we come out with information, we're going to support it with facts. It's not our opinion about what is happening. It is our interpretation of the facts that we're presenting.
Yeah, so you're a nonpartisan organization, and as a voter, would it be incorrect for me as just a voter to look at nmbizcoalition.org and take a look at some of the things that you've published and you've talked about when it comes to education, when it comes to crime, and to see that those are objective empirical facts that you're quoting? Is
Yeah,
it is
it's a
it, Carla, is it a leap to say, or to even ask the question, who is responsible for 8 years of failure in law enforcement?
well, it's the mayor and the chief of police that he put into place. When he came into office, we had a chief that was operating as a chief of police, and that chief was replaced. In fact, I believe the current chief is the third now, because what the mayor was looking for was a yes man. I call him a puppet, somebody who would do whatever the mayor said, whether it made sense for law enforcement and safety or not. And that has in my opinion, has gotten us into trouble with our police officers, because that's the reason they don't feel supported. They hired on to do a job, and that's to keep us safe. And they were directly told by the mayor and then by the chief not to arrest for certain crimes, not to do anything about the base issues, which are culminating in the increase in the murders and the violent crimes. And so, God bless them for serving. I'm thankful they're there, but we need to get them some support and let them do their job for which they were hired.
Yeah, I think it's shocking, actually, what Larry said earlier about at any given time, we probably have less than 250 officers on the street. Back in the mid 2000s, Brian McCutcheon was telling us in our interview that we did a week or so ago that when he was on the street, they only had a total of between, I think he said 600 to 800 officers, but as many as 400 were on the street at any one time. So didn't necessarily have a lot more officers than they have today, but a lot more of them were assigned to the street. Larry, you were saying that's one of the first steps that has to happen is you have to take people, put them in uniform, and have a professional presence. And are people that have desk jobs, are they trained to be on the street?
Absolutely, Jim. You don't get to a desk job until you have been on the streets. People that want to join the police department and say, I want to be a SWAT officer or I want to be a detective. Okay, that's great. But you work into those positions after you have gone through the same training and the same street experience that everybody does. So, a detective that works in a homicide unit or whatever unit, they are absolutely trained and are capable of taking calls for service. And
I've been doing a bunch of reading, obviously, on this, and I wanted to bring everybody's attention to a blog by Pete Donnelly, PeteDonnelly.com. And this is a headline of one of his podcasts. It says, Identifying Mayor Keller's Failing Metro Crime Initiatives. That's MCI for short. You law enforcement guys like all these acronyms. So, Mayor Keller's crime initiatives. After over 3 years, 5 action items, so 5, advertised and marketed initiatives having to do with youth, community policing, all of these different things. Not one of them was completed. And mysteriously, most of them have disappeared and are no longer talked about. 42 items remain of the Metro Crime Initiative's legislative agenda. 42 out of 50. Now, this is just taking what Mayor Keller's office said was going to happen. And Pete Donnelly has done a great job of evaluating and analyzing what has actually been completed. So I'll ask you, Carla, what do voters do with this information?
Well, they need to take it seriously, take it to heart, and then go to the polls, because he's had 8 years to accomplish what he defined that he would accomplish, and he has not. And we see the results of it. We live with the results every day. It's time for new leadership in Albuquerque. And there's a good reason why, even though we've allowed mayors to run for a third consecutive term, it's never happened before. We have not elected a mayor for a third consecutive term. And I don't think it's going to happen this time. I think the people in Albuquerque realize it's time for change. We need leadership that is going to put safety first and then economic development and get this city moving in the direction it ought to be going.
Well, I'm going to take another quote for you right off of the city website. Um, uh, it basically says, crime initiatives. If you just go right to cabq.org or .gov, you can go right in and actually read what Mayor Keller has said since 2017. All you have to do is kind of pull it up year by year. And in my view, I don't see the completion or even a positive direction in any of these initiatives. We're spending, for example, homelessness. Some people may not equate that directly with safety, but Carla, you've already mentioned that in many business neighborhoods, there are homeless people camping out on the sidewalks, and we see encampments all over the place that are not, quote, official, city encampments. I know you guys have published some information about these encampments and whether that was part of your questionnaire to all of the mayoral candidates about whether they would support that. I should say I've been able to speak directly with Mei Ling Armijo, who is a former United States military officer, and she said, Jim, she said, when it comes to crime, she said, I'm a military officer. And I'm paraphrasing what she said, but she said, I understand the chain of command. So, what I intend to do about law enforcement is to put a person in place that is well qualified, very knowledgeable, and then have them run the department. I'm not going to have the CAO of the city overseeing what the police chief does, and that's actually what Mike Geyer told us, Chief Geyer told us, was happening when he was working in the Keller administration.
Yeah, and that's why Mike isn't there anymore, because Mike wanted to be a chief of police. He wanted to oversee his police force and to assure the safety of the citizens. And that was not the ideal for Keller. And that's why he replaced Mike Geyer. And that is a shame. If he had allowed Mike to do his job, we would not be in the situation that we're in. When you brought up the homeless situation, that is something else that Keller has done, is just welcome them into our city. I think large cities are always going to have homeless, and we have had a population here for a while, but it has grown exponentially because Keller allows it. And so a lot of the people living on our streets are not from New Mexico. They come here because they're taken care of. The problem is they're creating a safety issue for the rest of us. And honestly, unfilthy living conditions. Because when they camp wherever they want, which is illegal, they don't have toilet facilities and shower facilities, and it is pretty disgusting. So Keller has spent millions of dollars for facilities, and they're not being used. So we have this continual problem of Keller putting more money into failed policies. We're not helping the people who need the help, which is hindering all the rest of us. And that's why we just need new leadership, and we need somebody who will come in and get a chief of police like Mike Geyer and some of the other former chiefs that we've had that truly care about the police force and want to do their job.
I want to read something directly from the city of Albuquerque's website. I'm assuming that this has been approved by the incumbent mayor because it is published on his website. It says, and this is referring back to 2021. Throughout the summer, the city of Albuquerque convened leaders from across the criminal justice system to collaborate on crime fighting in the metro area. The Metro Crime Initiative, MCI, mentioned that earlier, has created a to-do list action items the city and our partners are taking now to lower crime in Albuquerque. Okay, is it unfair for us to say whatever that initiative was and all of the components of it has not worked?
Well, Jim, not only has it not worked, but if we just go back to the basics and enforce existing laws, we'd be
Mm-hmm.
far ahead of where we are right now. when Albuquerque was safer, we had the same laws we have now. The difference was they were enforced. Right now, it's a free for all on the streets. There's no enforcement for traffic or for anything else going on out there. That's the problem. We don't have to create new rules and regulations, and we don't have to convene new groups of people to come up with great ideas. We need to go back to the basics and enforce the laws that are on the books.
Yes, yes. Well, and I guess I can't help but just, you deal with voters and you probably throw your hands up after every election. Why didn't more people vote? How can voters use nmbizcoalition.org as a tool to prepare for voting the first week of November?
Well, if you go to our website at nmbizcoalition.org, you can see unedited questionnaires that we got back from the mayoral candidates and some of the city council members. They're posted there unedited. It's what they said in answer to the questions. And these are questions every voter should care about. That's why we post them. We don't play games with candidates. We want to get to the hard truth about who they are, what they stand for, and what we can expect them to do if they're elected. So there's a bunch of resources on our website. There's a lot of other information out there from the candidates' websites. We just encourage voters to understand what their options are, who's running for the offices, and then pick the person that is best going to represent their interests. More importantly than anything, they've got to go vote. And it's not, our local elections are not partisan elections. Doesn't matter what party they're with. It matters what their experience is and what they're going to do for us. But we've got to get Albuquerqueans out to vote. It's critical.
Yeah. I want to quote an article. It was actually published in the New Mexico Sun based on a press release from Mayor Keller's office. It was August 17th of 2024. It's titled Mayor Keller Outlines Public Safety Initiatives During State of the City Address. And I'm just paging down a little bit. And what it basically says is one of the safety initiatives is creating an inclusive future. This is quoting directly from the press release. Efforts include building community spaces throughout the city, such as parks and multi-generational centers, adding dog parks, splash pads, bathrooms, water fountains that back into parks, put water fountains back into parks, planting trees, and pollinator gardens. I'm not sure, reading that, how that has anything to do really with safety.
Well, and who's going to take their kids to the park when it's so unsafe here? So you could beautify them all you want, but a parent that loves their child is not going to take them to those public parks because it is not safe to be there. And even if the people that are committing the crimes aren't there at the time, they've left the needles around and all kinds of drug paraphernalia. You just don't want your children in our parks until we clean them up.
Yeah, Larry, I'm going. You're still a young guy, so don't take this wrong. I always enjoy that meme I read occasionally that says, "I really don't like old people till I realize I went to high school with them." Uh, I know you were a West Mesa Mustang. I bring that up only because there's people watching this that are going to say, "Oh, well, Larry, he's from my neighborhood," and I think they kind of identify with that in many ways. We know that you're longtime New Mexicans and very dedicated to helping New Mexico as a whole, and we're specifically talking about Albuquerque today and crime initiatives. But let's just say that you have just gotten out of college, or you've been working in another job. You've always had on your heart that you want to be part of law enforcement. What would you be looking at today in order to find the place you want to start your career? And where would Albuquerque fall in as you look at a place to be employed?
Well, the situation for law enforcement has changed, and with Albuquerque Police Department and in New Mexico, there's no longer, we've talked about it before, qualified immunity. So That right there would probably, like Carla said, she wouldn't support me going into law enforcement if we threw the clock back 30, 35 years. I wouldn't put my family's well-being in jeopardy because officers have to make split-second decisions, and for their livelihood to be put on the line where you can be sued for doing your job, it's just not acceptable. So I wouldn't go down that road.
Um, I always feel bad when I make a sports analogy, but I've seen a lot of coaches, basketball, football coaches at the University of New Mexico, for example, that have come and gone. Some of those coaches have had very poor records. They're really nice people, but they haven't done well and they've gotten fired. In this case, we're not talking about sports and entertainment. We're talking about the livelihood of 600,000 or 700,000 people that live in Albuquerque. And I don't know how you would quantify the incumbent mayor and the incumbent chief of police winning record, but I would say they're below 500. Would you agree?
Yes, and that is a great analogy. We hope the voters go forward with that exact mindset. We are hiring the CEO, the chief executive officer, to run a major metropolitan city, multi-million, billion-dollar. He needs to be able to hire the right people for public safety. And if you look at the last 7 years, in a business perspective, you're right. It's less than 50% success by numerous metrics. And recent polls have actually shown that fewer than 50% of Albuquerqueans are happy with the direction that the city's going. So if you're hiring for a business or hiring for a CEO, the mayor of a city, putting somebody back into a position that they have not been successful for the previous 7 going on 8 years just doesn't make sense.
Carla, how does the election work? The election for mayor, and we're also electing some city councilors, is, I guess they call a nonpartisan election. So this is not about Democrats or Republicans. I want to emphasize again, your organizations are nonpartisan in their approach. This is not a, hey, let's go progressive, let's go MAGA. This is what's best for Albuquerque. So how does the election actually work? How do we determine a winner?
Well, it's going to be interesting because we've got 7 candidates running now for mayor as an example. So it is highly likely we're going to have a runoff. People will go to vote. They can start very soon, but election day is November 4th. After that time, they will, unless one candidate gets over 50% of the vote, there's going to be a runoff with the top 2. And those 2 then will have another vote, and that will be in early December. So we have time, but it's really important for people to vote initially in this election, whether or not there's a runoff, trying to pick the very best candidate for mayor. In the city council, it's not too likely we're going to have a runoff in any of those races. But all the candidates are running without an initial behind their name about whether or not they're Republican or Democrat. So our organization has always been that way. We're nonpartisan. We don't care how a person is registered. What we care about are the decisions they're making and how that's going to carry forward for the management of the city or state or whatever position they're running for.
I noticed on your website, again, nmbizcoalition.org, that you offered a questionnaire to all 7 candidates, and I think 5 responded. Were you surprised by any of the answers that you got?
Not really, because when you really watch the candidates and get to know them, you anticipate what they're going to do and you have a feel for who they are and what they represent. So while some were a little disappointing, there weren't really any surprises.
Leadership is tough. I can tell you again, going back to the entertainment, sports, and I always emphasize that because I don't want people to think that we're trivializing being the mayor of Albuquerque or being the head of the chief of police of a big department. I don't believe they're the same thing. But if we are, as a community, if we put that much pressure on our coaches to win, boy, shouldn't we be have higher expectations and be putting more accountability on the people that are managing life or death for us?
Absolutely.
We absolutely deserve better, Jim, and that's what we hope voters are not. Recently, as you mentioned, they're saying the mayor's saying that crime stats are better, things are going in the right direction. Well, it needs to be put in perspective. 2 years ago or last year, 2024, I think the violent crime rate for the city of Albuquerque was about 167% higher than the national average. So now we're hearing that violent crimes are down 12%. Okay, so we're still at 150% higher than the national average. We deserve better, and we hope voters can see that.
Yeah, what I love is I love reading things that again off the city website. I want to read. Actually, this is not the city. This is an organization called City Desk. And they have information that they publish periodically. This statement says, and this is all available at citydesk.com. By mid fiscal year 2024, the Albuquerque Police Department had 856 sworn officers. This number is lower than in fiscal years 23 and 22, which had 877 and 894 officers, respectively. So, again, COVID's over. Nationally, crime stats went up for 20 and 21 all across the board. And then, yes, crime has begun to decrease since that time. But our crime stats are much higher than they were in 2019. And Larry, here's the comparative thing. New Mexico is always at the bottom of the good list and at the top of the bad list. And that goes across the board. I think I read somewhere that for over 100 years, the Democrats have controlled management of our state, even when we've had a Republican governor. So our House of Representatives and our state Senate have been controlled largely by Democrats. Now, I have some great friends that are Democrats. I appreciate their service. They work hard. But I think they would even say we don't have a great record of turning things around. And it all kinds of comes together. It's not just crime, it's education. Yeah, sure, Carla said it's nice to have nice parks, but that park is not going to stay nice very long if you allow bad guys to use it to extort people and harm people all the time. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. Carla, why don't you wrap up with us and say what are your business members looking for, and how far do we need to go? Maybe I should ask it this way. Hard work is sometimes confused with complexity. In other words, I don't view this as a complex problem. I just think it's going to require some hard work. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. And as I said earlier, I think what we need to do is get back focused at the basics. We don't have to recreate the wheel. We need to go back to when we were on the sanity plane of safety and processes that were working. Now, New Mexico really needs to change. We lag far behind. If you compare us with Arizona, because we came into statehood around the same time. Arizona is now 6 times larger. They have, and that's in population, but look at their business environment. Everything is thriving there. They don't have the crime problem that we do. That all goes back to leadership, and that is at the state level. And it has something to do with who we're electing at every level. So we just encourage people to get engaged. If you don't have a lot of time to do research, go to our website at nmbizcoalition.org and glean some of the facts there that will help you. We promise that they're going to be nonpartisan and truly just the facts to help you make an informed decision when you go to the polls. But please go vote. We can change this state for the positive.
And it's not going to take a lot of votes, is it?
No, no, we've had some races that have been won by just a handful of votes. We've had some that have come down to ties. And New Mexico has some interesting ways of breaking ties. But let's not go there. Get more people to vote. When you decide you're going to vote, make sure that your friends, your family members, and your associates are also going to vote, because that's what makes the difference. Turnout in the local elections is usually very, very low, which is unfortunate because you see what happens in our city as a result. But the other thing is, sometimes you get people in office in a lower level office, school board, city council, county commission, and then they become governor of the state or a US senator from New Mexico. So voting at every election matters.
I love it. Larry and Carla, thank you for joining us today. Appreciate all your hard work, and I'm hoping that people will utilize the New Mexico Business Coalition and Better Together New Mexico. Maybe we shouldn't close until you say one or two words about Better Together, because that's a sister organization to the New Mexico Business Coalition.
Yes, so Better Together was organized 4 years ago. And what we did was we brought together like-minded groups throughout the state. Everybody had their own lane, their own issue that they were working on, some on election integrity, some on law enforcement, some on medical issues, but all of them come together on certain issues like crime and safety and business policy. And so that is another avenue to stay informed and get involved. And you're welcome at Better Together New Mexico. New Mexico's all spelled out. BetterTogetherNewMexico.org to join us there and get our emails. There's no charge for that and no obligation to stay informed.
Yeah, and I know you have some tools like action items you provide during the legislative session, which is an easy way for citizens like us to communicate with our legislators, and that's kind of an automated process. Uh, you allow us to customize it or utilize some standard letters based on positions you think would be beneficial. So, again, thank you for the tool, the New Mexico Business Coalition.org and BetterTogetherNewMexico.org. And we'll stay in touch and can't wait to see you. Hope the election goes as you hope.
Well, thanks for having
Thanks,
us,
Jim.
Jim.